I read Katabasis by R.F. Kuang. This is a reread for me. I picked it up right away when it came out because I'm just a big R.F. Kuang fan. Everything that she writes is really great. And so I was looking forward to this book, which is basically, it's kind of a fantasy. I really think that this is her first break into literature, which is maybe a weird thing to say. I think all of her stuff is more complex than your average fantasy story and like has a lot of layers to it, has a lot of interesting characters that where a lot of stuff is going on. And so this is no different than those. And it has a lot of fantasy conventions in terms of like having a magic system. Its setting is very supernatural. It has an alternate world with an alternate history and all of this kind of stuff. There's like a lot of world building that is done according to the rules, quote unquote, of the fantasy genre. So it's not like a literary person who takes some fantastical elements and kind of sprinkles them into their story. I guess the reason that I call this literature is that it is deliberately in dialogue with other literary works about the same idea. And so the idea here is, like the title says, Katabasis is the descent into the underworld of the dead. That's what that word means. And this has been done, for thousands of years in all different kinds of cultures. And the book, in a very self-aware way, references those and uses those other stories as a literally making a map of the way to tell a story like this. And so I think that's a little bit different than writing a fantasy in a fantasy genre, which is naturally in dialogue with everything else in the genre, but is mostly recreating the kind of structure that that fantasy, like as a genre, is made from. Like that is the purpose of the genre, is to like recreate itself over and over and over again. And this is different than that. It's, like I said, I feel like she is stepping outside of the structure of fantasy and doing something a little bit different that is directly in dialogue with literature from all over the world and from across, like deep into our history, all kinds of ancient myths and stuff. So the story is about a young woman named Alice Law, who is a Cambridge student, and her professor, who is a master, a magician, and she's a magician, and they study magic. So this is part of the alternate history that I mentioned. The professor has died in a really gruesome way, and now he is in the afterlife and he is in hell. And Alice needs to bring him back so that she can fulfill all of her ambitions, because he's the most like prestigious professor in his department, and he's going to open all the doors for her to have the kind of career in life that she needs to have, and he's the only one who can do that for her. And so she needs to go to hell and get him back so that he can pass her and she can go on to her glorious academic career. The premise there is kind of absurd. It's kind of clearly making a little bit of an allegory about, like academia is hell, right? And the lengths to which people will go to join the kind of rarefied ranks of, the privileged class of the ultra elite academics. Because to get into hell, Alice has to give up half of her lifespan. And she feels like this is worth it because half of a life of extreme privilege and renown and academic power is better than a whole life of mediocrity. And so Alice there's a lot of irony in the book. Nothing is really straightforward. And Alice, at the beginning of the story especially, is a really cynical character. She's very hard-boiled, I feel like, which is to say that she has this really tough exterior, these really high emotional walls, and she is very numb to lots of experiences that she's had, which she has to have those qualities in order to have kind of climbed her way up to the point that she is in her academic career. There are all kinds of things set against her in society. So there's sexism, there's racism, there's classism, and there's exploitation of young people. There's all kinds of, like I said, just all kinds of forces set against her. And so she has had to numb herself and kind of just tell herself that it's all going to be worth it in the end. And she sacrificed so much to get here. She just needs to sacrifice a little bit more to make it through. And you just do that over and over and over. And the reason I call her cynical is because she genuinely believes that everyone else, if they had the chance, would kind of like step over her dead body or do whatever it takes to get her position. And they would, if people could have the top academic spot, like be one of the most powerful people in academia, they would do anything to get there if they could. And the if they could is really important also to understanding Alice's character, because the other part of the whole thing that she needs to strongly believe in is the fact that she has earned her way into the spot that she's in, that she really deserves to be there, that her intellect is special, her drive is special, and that nobody else could do it. And that the system, as unfair as it is all of these elements of all these isms that are set against her and that she's had to overcome, there is still a bedrock of meritocracy to the system somewhat, like there are all kinds of unfair, like nepotism and blah, 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 blah. But still, like the most brilliant people are the only ones who really have a shot at the highest spot to begin with. And so you have to be great in order to get to those great places and keep them, according to the way that Alice sees the world. And so she believes that she has greatness, and she believes that she is doing whatever it takes to maximize that greatness in the system. And the reason that really matters in the story, like all of that, you might just be like, yeah, obviously that you're just talking about the real world. That is how the world works. People who work hard get ahead, and people who are especially talented and work hard are the people who get ahead the most. And like, okay, but the thing about all of that is that there's a dark side and underside to that whole thing, because if you deserve the success, then that means that there are people who deserve the failure. That when bad things come their way, when opportunities don't work out, or when those unfair, unbalanced things come along and derail your life, there is a way in which if you let it derail you, then you were never cut out to do it in the first place. You were never good enough, and you deserve to not have it. And you're trapped into believing that if you believe the other thing. If you believe that you are there because of your greatness, because of your hard work, then you have to believe when you don't get the opportunities that you didn't get them because you didn't deserve them. And that is really what this book is about. It is the struggle that Alice has with that belief in the system and in herself. And the consequences of that, the fallout of it, all the ways that she feels like a failure, all the ways that the system has abused her, she feels like she deserves that abuse on a certain level, because if she doesn't believe that she deserves the abuse, then she can't believe that she deserves the praise and the high honors and the high status and the high power that, comes along with it. So her professor is named Jacob Grimes, and he was doing some kind of experiment and blew himself up, and she gathered up the parts of his body, and then she does an experimental spell that nobody's ever come up with before. And the other graduate student or PhD candidate student who was working for Professor Grimes and has been Alice's longtime academic partner, named Peter, comes along right when she's doing the ritual and comes with her, and they both go into hell together. And then the story is, it's structured a lot like the first part or the first third of the Divine Comedy by Dante, Dante's Inferno, or, like Odysseus's trek into Hades, or any number of other classical sources that are referenced throughout the book, all with, this kind of academic layering to it that is making a commentary on particular institutions, in real life. And the book has a lot of humor because of that, in the same way that Dante's Inferno is sometimes funny. But I think there's also symbolically a lot to the way that how you see the world kind of creates a heaven or a hell out of things. Alice talks a lot about the past, when she was just beginning to be a graduate student, when she first gets to Cambridge, when she first meets Peter, and how she felt really different about things at that time versus, the way that it's been the past few weeks leading up to the death of her sponsor, her professor. And some of the major differences were that she was just really invested in thinking and learning and trading ideas with people, being taken seriously by her peers, and just learning about new things, being exposed to all kinds of knowledge, being excited by how much there was to find out, versus later on, she's worried about how she's being passed over for various awards. She's not being invited to the right lecture series. She's not being taken seriously for publishing. She's, and all of these kind of things, anxieties about not achieving enough, not being recognized in the ways that prove that the hard work and sacrifice that she's putting in are kind of quote unquote paying off. And so it changes, her view of the work changes, I guess is what I'm saying. That before, knowledge was exciting for its own sake. This community was exciting just to be a part of. And then later, none of that is good enough. And the things that really matter are recognition, power, and the knowledge is just a means to an end for that kind of reward. And I think it's that perspective, that shift, that changes what was, kind of utopian or a paradise in the first case into what becomes a literal hell. At this point, Alice is willing to literally go to hell because she wants to achieve that graduating with a PhD. That matters more than half of her life. That recognition, the way in which going to hell and coming back is going to make her famous, the way that her bringing her professor back from hell is going to fundamentally change how everyone understands magic, and she's going to be a very special, famous, important, powerful person after this. And so much of the different parts of hell that they visit that are broken up into the different sins in exactly the way that it is in Dante's Inferno are about this shift in perspective, that the people who are trapped in any given part of hell, they have to write a dissertation paper that is so convincing that they get to graduate out of the level of hell that they're in and progress to some other place. Well, that's just a story that they're telling themselves. That's just a perspective on their situation that they have adopted and told each other and transmitted to each other, and is not actually the truth. They could just pick up and leave that spot, but they can't allow themselves to do that, because in the same way that like Alice could just go to another university instead of going to hell to chase this guy. She could drop out of academia, any number of things that she could do, but she can't, in her mind. She has to do this thing because she is so locked in by the way that she sees the world. That perspective problem is mirrored and repeated again and again and again as she goes through the different levels of hell. Peter stands as a contrast to Alice in that he is not here because of ambition and seeking power, and he has retained some of his relationship with the pursuit of knowledge that Alice originally had, but has been disillusioned by the experiences that he has had with Professor Grimes and with Alice herself. And so he doesn't like to see people as being cynical, but he has been stabbed in the back by Professor Grimes, who stole his work and ideas. And he's seen Alice, it kind of misunderstood what was going on in an incident where she was being sexually assaulted by Professor Grimes, seeing that as a way of her kind of getting Grimes's approval by trading sex for his approval, and that she's having like an inappropriate relationship with the professor and seeing that as like a cynical move on her part. But where Alice has completely adopted, this idea that everyone is cynical, and she sees Peter as very cynical. Her interpretation of all of his actions is as unkind as it could be at any given moment, because I think she needs to project onto everybody else this attitude that she has in order to justify it to herself. The way that she treats other people has to be justified because it's so heinous and unbalanced. So she sees Peter as someone who is arrogant and smug, but who somehow deserves to be those things because of his great brilliance. And she sees that in contrast to her. She sees Peter as being smarter than her, but not, being as driven as she is, being more careless than her. And she's like got more hustle than him. But she's always afraid that if he ever does get it together and, get the kind of hustle that she has, that's it for her. She's cooked. She can never keep up with him. So she sees Peter as being better than her in some ways, but that she's wary of him because that makes her afraid of him, his innate superiority. And so they used to be friends. Again, this, comes down to the kind of perspective thing in the way in which things have shifted from something that was good and healthy into a literal hell. They were friends, they were close, but this shift in the way that Alice sees the world and the cynical behavior and the cynical outlook has poisoned the friendship because it makes her see everything that he does as an attack. Now, the magic system in this book is interesting. It's related to other magic systems that Kuang has had in other books, especially like her dark academic book, Babel. And it has to do with the intrinsic lack of clarity that language itself has. And so the way that people do magic is by introducing a paradox through a linguistic construction and then adjusting their internal beliefs to reflect that paradox. And so there's any number of classic and modern paradoxes that are used throughout the story. It's a lot of fun if you're into this stuff, which I am. I'm into religions and philosophy and stuff. So this book was like candy for me. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think these things are a lot of fun. They're funny. And it's a cool idea for a magic system. But more than all of that, I think it's being deployed in a kind of symbolic way also, because paradox is so, so vital and important in the story as a theme. Because I keep talking about the way in which, Alice's perspective has switched this into that and that into this. And that is what paradox does. It holds these mutually exclusive elements of one unified thing. And so it should not be the case that Peter can be her friend, can be someone that she cares about deeply, but is also her bitter rival and enemy. That is a contradiction. That is a paradox. But that is the way that Alice feels about Peter. Alice feels about Professor Grimes that he is a terrible person who has hurt her deeply, who has sexually assaulted her and has taken away her future and her opportunities by dying, but also is a brilliant and worthy person who deserves to have the power to do those things to her because of his accomplishments, because of his station in the university, and on and on and on like that. And so there are elements to Alice's world that contradict each other, that don't make any sense, that are held together by these paradoxes. The way that she sees the world is disordered, and everything about her training has been about learning to think in this way, to do this kind of double think where you believe something that you know is not true in order to accomplish the impossible. And that is her entire approach to her career. There's something that Kuang is saying about academia itself, that there is this tremendous sacrifice that is demanded on the part of the PhD candidate that in the aftermath of it is probably not worth it in terms of material wealth, of power, of respect, of privilege. And yet, why would it, these are supposed to be really smart, very rational people. Why would they make that exchange? And the reason is, according to the story, because they are telling themselves that it is worth it, even though it isn't. That the system is not broken, even though it is. That the abuse of their superiors is justified, even though it isn't. At the same time, though, paradoxes are not entirely unhealthy and disordered in the story, which is something that I love because it means that the paradox as a symbol or a symbolic tool in the story is itself a paradox. It's kind of brilliant, I think. So the paradox, has all of this. It's a gateway into this unhealthy thinking that allows Alice to be abused, but at the same time, it becomes the element which delivers her out of hell. It is the thing that allows her to discover a dialethic artifact in hell. And so dialetheia is a word, I believe it's Greek. Yeah, it's got to be because it has aletheia in it. So aletheia means truth, which comes from, it's the same root word as the Lethe River in hell. This is the river that if you drink its water, then it makes you forget. That root word of Lethe in the Greek means to cover something up or to hide something, to make it unseen, there's something like deceptive or lying there, something about hiding things. That's kind of the sense of the word. And so when you add the a prefix to it, this means like no or not or the opposite of whatever comes after it. So like if you're an atheist, then a theist is someone who believes in God. An atheist is someone who doesn't believe that there is a God. So aletheia means the truth. Lethe means to cover things up and hide them and lie. And the opposite of that, the no lying, is the truth. So truth in our conception, especially in the English-speaking West, is singular in its being, that there is, if you get down to the truth of any situation, then there's like a singular story about it. There can't be any way in which that is contradicted, because that would be a paradox. And so we can't have that. The truth is the truth. That's what makes it the truth, that it is singular. So a dialethic view of reality says that there are multiple truths that are present in a situation at any given time, at least two. And that those truths may be in some ways incompatible. So the example of this in the story that we get is one of the most famous. So the dialethic statement, or like the paradoxically true but untrue statement of the liar paradox, where you say that this sentence is a lie. And like if that sentence is false, then that makes it true. But if it's true, then it also has to be false. And so it is both true and false simultaneously, because of the conditional statements or the conditional definitions of every word in the statement and how they work together, right? Well, eventually Alice finds a dialethic artifact in hell, a tree that is able to grow and flourish and has beauty and purity and goodness to it, even though it is growing from the barren soil of hell where nothing beautiful can exist. And she also like finds all kinds of beauty in hell. She finds people who have different perspectives than hers. And so this dialethic paradoxical concept is explored in many of the different layers, as you're going through the different sins and all that stuff. But the point being that the paradox, on the one hand, in the story, is a way of seeing the world that is hurting Alice. But at the end of the story, it's also what delivers her out of hell and allows her to gain a new perspective, or maybe to regain her original perspective that is more in tune with healthy outlook of the world that is not so cynical. I like how Alice and Peter's names are allusions to classic works of fiction that have to do with a kind of portal fantasy tradition, where you have Peter Pan, you have Alice in Wonderland, these characters who have a connection to England, but who sojourn into fantastical realms that are, beset by the problems of growing into adulthood, but also of deep philosophical examinations that are peppered with adventure and humor, right? I don't think that is an accident. And that's like, there's a million layers of allusion in this story to different stories. And honestly, like, the entire novel deserves like a deep breakdown of like an entire podcasting project that would be several episodes, where there's all kinds of stuff going on in the story. And whatever I'm doing here off the top of my head is a very, very, very superficial read of what she is doing, I think, because there's all kinds of aspects and themes that I'm not getting into at all and I don't have time to get into. I haven't even touched the way in which Alice is a mixed race person and her Chinese heritage, the way that she brings in Buddhism, the way that the story ends with her talking to Lord Yama instead of, like a Western version of like Hades or the devil or something like that. I think that she's doing a really interesting thing with the story where she's not syncretizing religions. She's not blending religions. Instead, she's building a world that utilizes the views of different religions, but expressly to explore this idea and theme of perspective kind of ruining your enjoyment of life. The way in which hell is not a place or a disposition or like a way of being, instead it is a way of seeing, it is a way of doing, a way of living your life. If you are living your life in certain ways, you are making your life into a hell, is kind of what the story is saying. Because at the end, when Alice confronts Grimes, it's not just about Grimes getting justice or Alice getting justice for the things that have happened to her paying the right kind of price for her to kind of move on into the next steps of her life. That's not exactly what's happening. Instead, I think she learns through an act of grace. When she gets the dialethic artifact, she receives it from a character who she stabbed in the back, who she treated as another cynical player in a kind of prisoner's dilemma situation. And she's like, if I don't stab her in the back first, she's going to stab me in the back. She has things that I need. I'm better than her. I deserve those things. I'm going to take them at the first opportunity because my goals are more important than her goals. And she does. She steals from her and she almost kills this other person. And then that person not only forgives her, but gives her the gift of the dialethia so that she can go to Lord Yama, so that she can ask to be delivered out of hell, and so that all of this can come to a stop. And it is that act where she is given something that she does not deserve that finally breaks her cynical view of the world that is necessarily cynical because she needs to believe in the meritocracy of her own greatness, that she earns her top spot, that Grimes earned his spot, that he deserves to treat people the way that he does, and she deserves to be mistreated the way that she was. She knows that she did not deserve that dialethic artifact. She knows it. There's no getting around it in the story. And the fact that she knows it and that she accepts it is what breaks her out of this belief that things happen to you in life because you deserve them. Things happen in life instead because that's life. This is kind of the conclusion that she comes to. Like, you are alive and you make choices and things happen. Other people make choices and they intersect with your life and things happen. Deserve doesn't come into it. Not in any real way. And to get pleasure out of life, to have happiness, means to give up this illusion that you can earn it. You can't receive gifts if they are earned because those are not gifts. Those are rewards. So nothing in life can ever be a gift if you go through life believing that everything is about earning it and working for it. Instead, she has to transform life into a gift by taking on a new perspective, kind of giving a new story to life, adopting a different kind of paradox that reframes all of reality for her. in exactly the way that the magic system works. And so this new paradox is that, we not everything in life is earned, and that life is a gift, and that to receive it means that you don't deserve it, but you do get to enjoy it. And so that is why Grimes falls out of her life. It's not about justice. I mean, the scene is very satisfying where he is punished and goes through like a grueling experience, but it's not about justice per se. It's about letting go of what he represents for her. And once she does, she's able to go back to Cambridge, and it doesn't even matter to her anymore if she graduates. And she has Peter again, and she allows herself to relax into the love and affection and attraction and romance that she feels for him, and fully express that to him instead of being worried that it will be used as a weapon against her in this ambitious climb for power and rank and prestige. Instead, she takes his presence as a gift, the feelings that she has for him as a gift, and appreciates them. And it, looks up into the starry night and appreciates the universe as a gift, and the time that they have together to gaze at the stars and then think about the beauty of the universe and look at his face and the beauty of his face, all of it as a gift for her pleasure. That is a radically different view of the world compared to the way that she was seeing things at the beginning of the story, and is an even richer and deeper way of looking at things than just the simple excitement of coming to the university, that we see in the backstory, and finding a community for the first time and being excited about learning and newness and all that stuff. She has a much deeper, richer appreciation for all things, and a much stronger base, I think, for building a life going forward. So the way in which, the story is constructed with the magic system, the idea of paradox, the language, all of the illusions through the whole thing, it all builds up to this kind of life lesson of hell is something that we make for ourselves. And that is good news, because it means that heaven is something that we can make for ourselves too. And so in a lot of ways, I think this is her best novel yet. I know that a lot of people don't feel that way and that they really hate this book, but I think that she's really like coming into her own, and she was already a tremendous and powerful writer for years and years. I mean, I was on top of the Poppy War as soon as it hit, and I've been impressed with her all the way through. And I think that her storytelling abilities are maturing dramatically, and she is stepping into realms that she is well equipped and is handling brilliantly. And so I look forward to the rest of her work, and I'm glad that I reread this book. It's the second time that I've read it, and it makes me want to do like a larger project that like more deeply dives into the book and really like pulls it apart and think about it more deeply, because it's just such an impressive book.